So it's that time of year again where I tell you about all the books I really enjoyed reading last year. Hi everybody, it's Jade, and today I'm going to be giving you my top 10 list of books that I read in 2022. I have actually ranked them this time. I think last year it was only my top 3 that were actually ranked, the rest sort of were just in any order, whereas this time I have tried to rank them as much as possible. So we're just going to get straight into it, and I'm going to go from number 10 up to number 1. Obviously number 1 being my favourite book of last year. So number 10 was To Paradise by Hana Yanagihara. This is a lot lower than A Little Life was last year, only because it didn't emotionally eviscerate me the same way that A Little Life did. Whereas A Little Life was just pain and emotional turmoil, this gave me... It was still really good. It just gave me sort of like a sense of just melancholy the entire way, which it was potentially what she was going for. I'm not sure, but it's also, it's just a massive book. So To Paradise is technically 3 stories that are all slightly interconnected in that they take place, I think, in the same universe and are mostly the same family in different generations. I'm guessing because they all have the same names, just in different generations. But the first one takes place in what? I'm about to say I can't remember the actual dates. First one takes place in 1893 in an alternate universe America where New York is sort of almost its own country, and it's a country where gay marriage was never illegal. It's sort of fully accepted, and the main character is a young aristocrat who is having a marriage arranged for him with another man, because that's also just something that happens a lot more often in this alternate universe. It's something that is just accepted, that you ask for a marriage broker to arrange you a marriage with another noble. The second one is in... the second story is set in 1993, during the AIDS epidemic, and is all about a young man, and is all about a young man's sort of troubled relationship with his father, who lives back in Hawaii. And then the final one is set in the future in 2093, where the world has been besieged multiple times with various pandemics and epidemics, and is now in its sort of last dregs, where it's just society is just constantly preparing for the next pandemic to hit and how they're going to deal with it and keep people safe. Which hit a little bit close to home, I have to say. The thing that I actually personally enjoyed about these was that each story ended not on a cliffhanger, but had no real resolution. It ended with, if you want to see it this way, it could have ended really happily. You don't know, or it could have ended really unhappily. It, I guess, just depends on what your view of it would be. There was no concrete, we're building up to this and then this is actually the result of it. It's all just something could happen in the future, and it's up to you to decide whether or not that was a happy ending or an unhappy ending. Which I know for some people, like my friend who I described this to, refuses to read it based on the fact that there is no concrete ending. So it can leave you quite unsatisfied if that is not your cup of tea. And I didn't realise it was my cup of tea, but I quite enjoyed it, because that's like, oh, I can sit here and just imagine that it went well. Number 9, I don't have a physical copy of, because I listened to it as an audiobook, and that was And the Ocean Was Our Sky by Patrick Ness. I love Patrick Ness. I've enjoyed every single book I've read of his, even the ones that I didn't love as much as other ones, such as A Monster Calls has probably been one of my least favourites. I still really enjoyed it. But And the Ocean Was Our Sky is a Moby Dick retelling, set in a universe where whales are fully sentient and hunt humans the same way that humans hunt whales. But their world is upside down, so for them, they swim upside down, so the air and everything is below them, and the ocean is their sky. And basically, instead of the white whale, you have the white hull of a ship that has very historically hunted whales. Yeah, it was a really good take on the Moby Dick story. In my opinion, there was like some fantastical elements to it, and the characterizations of the whales that you follow were really well done, and there was a plot twist at the end that I did not see coming, but when it happened I was like, ooh! It's also not super long. I think the audiobook was about 5 hours or something, which I don't know how that would translate to like pages, but yeah, I enjoyed it. So those were the only 2 4-stars on this list. We are now into all of my 5-star books of the year. So number 8 on my list was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Last year was the first year I ever read Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I have become obsessed with her. I want to read everything she's ever written now. There is another Taylor Jenkins Reid book on this list that rated higher than this one, but Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is set mostly during like the golden age of cinema, so the 1950s and 60s, when studios had almost like ownership of their actors and actresses and stuff, and it's a biography of a fictional film star, Evelyn Hugo, who is dictating her memoirs as she is reaching the end of her life, and she's never given like interviews about her life before now, and throughout her Hollywood career, she had 7 different husbands, and so she talks about through each one of those marriages, as well as all the other things that were going on around those marriages and everything, and how she was commodified because of her beauty. And it's just, Taylor Jenkins Reid writes really good, strong female characters, and by strong female characters I don't mean what a lot of people seem to think strong female characters should mean, which is characters that can just kick ass. But strong as in they're opinionated, they're deeply flawed, not always good people, but they are fully rounded human beings in their own right, and Taylor is really good at writing those. And like, a lot of the time I was reading this and thinking, wow, Evelyn Hugo is not a good person, she's a bitch. But I'm still rooting for her, and I'm still really enjoying her story. And because that's the thing I seem to have noticed in a lot of media at the moment, is that people don't seem to understand that a character can have flaws and you can still like them. Like, unless a character is fully angelic and has never done anything wrong in their life, you're not allowed to like them, otherwise you're a problematic person. And I don't like the puritanical culture that we are moving towards. But that's an aside. This is a really good book. Number 7 also happens to be the shortest book I read last year, and that is Hex by Jenny Fagan. Okay, so Hex is actually part of a series of unrelated books that the publishing house Polygon have published, called The Darkland Tales, and is basically a series of retellings of stories from Scottish history in short form. And so this one focuses on the convicted, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, Gellis Duncan, who was a young girl who was hanged for witchcraft. And this is a story of a future witch going back in time to comfort Gellis in her last night on Earth while she sat in her cell waiting to be hanged the next day, and giving her comfort and telling her that she isn't a bad person, that what happened to her was wrong and all that stuff. And it's just, there's not an awful lot of plot. I mean, you get the history of what happened to Gellis, and it was horrific. And I actually, when I was reading this, I was like, I remember reading about that story, actually. Obviously not in the time that it happened, because it happened in the 1500s, 1591 to be specific. But reading about witch trials and stuff like that, and the things that were done to this young girl. I mean, she was like 15 or something when she was hanged, and just things that were done to other women who were considered to be witches and stuff. But it's just, the reason I think I loved it so much was that it's so full of compassion and understanding and just connection between these two people, and just a deep desire for someone to almost like potentially lose their spirit, because going back in time spirit wise is difficult in this, and you're not guaranteed that you can come back to the present time in your body, but she's so determined to give this young girl some love before she dies that she's willing to sacrifice that. And it was so heartwarming despite the horror that is in this short book. Number 6 on my list is Iron Widow by Ziran Jie Zhao. I still don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm so bad with names. But this, oh god, I loved this book so much. This book is so angry. And I also found out that I'm fairly certain the sequel to this has been published now, or is going to be published this year, and I can't wait for it. But this is basically, this is like Pacific Rim in Imperial China with aliens, and it's amazing. And in this universe, aliens have invaded, and to fight them, humanity has discovered that they can reanimate the alien corpses and pilot them. But the only way you can pilot them is with two people. You have a pilot and you have a consort or a concubine. And so the concubines are basically always women, and during the piloting of it, the pilot will basically zap the concubine of her life spirit and pretty much kill her. Every single time these reanimated carcasses go out to fight, you can guarantee that when they come back, the pilot is going to be the only one that is alive. And it's a treatise on how women are viewed as, in this universe, are viewed as property and completely expendable, and the men can do whatever they want to them, and like, yeah, they're just there to be used, basically. And you have this character who, what is her name? Zetian. You have this character, Zetian, who offers herself up to be a concubine because she wants to avenge her sister, who also was made into a concubine and died. And after her first trip out, she returns alive, and I believe the pilot is dead. She becomes an Iron Widow, because you have certain concubines that are able to survive this bonding, and they're called Iron Princesses because they can go out with the same person again and again and they won't come back dead. And so they're considered to be like a married couple of like the highest standing. You have an Iron Princess and you have the princes. These that's what these pilots are considered to be, like royalty. And so when she comes back and she's the only one alive, she's an Iron Widow, and she decides to make that everybody's problem, and it's great. Number 5 is another one that I don't have a physical copy of, but I will be buying at some point because I loved it so much. But I listened to it in audio. No, I didn't listen to it on audiobook. I borrowed it from the library. And that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the other Taylor Jenkins Reid book on this list. This book is written as though it's like a documentary. So it's basically a series of interviews from different people from this band, Daisy Jones and the Six, which were a massive rock band in the 70s, and then, like, overnight, they broke up and no one knows why. And this is the first time they're all being interviewed, like, a couple of decades later, to find out what happened. How did Daisy Jones and the Six become a thing? What went wrong for them to all break up, for, like, this massive band to just say, no, we're not doing it anymore. And, again, super real characters that are all deeply flawed, and there are certain times when you're reading this and you just want to scream at them, but they all feel like people that I can imagine actually meeting in real life. And again, Daisy Jones is just this firecracker, flawed character that is, yeah, like, deeply, deeply flawed and troubled, and but is so real and sympathetic as well at the same time. Oh, it's so good. And it seemed to just, as I was reading it, I think I might have read it in the spring, but as I was reading it, I was getting, like peak summertime feels from it. Like I could be absorbed back into like those 1970s music videos where it's all sunny and stuff like that, and it was just, sorry, I thought I saw my cat, it's not. Yeah, just amazing book. Every time I film one of these things, I start to feel really like congested. Number 4 is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. Probably should be no surprise that the TJ Klune book I read this year ended up on this list. He knows how to make me sob in the best way, and so I'm like crying at the same time as my heart is just swelling and I feel warm and comforted. This also I read this in a really poignant time in my life, because this book is all about death and grief and how to come to terms with death and letting people go and accepting that things end. And I read this quite soon after my aunt died, and it really helped me. But basically, this follows the story of Wallace, who dies unexpectedly. He's taken to this little house in the woods, which is owned by a man called Hugo, who is a ferryman whose job is to help spirits come to terms with the fact that they have died, and then to help them to move on to the next whatever is after this world. And Wallace is very not okay with this. He's not happy with the fact that he's died. He's got too much to do. He needs to be alive again. He needs to go back to his like high-powered job and just finish what he was starting. And so he's like really resistant to Hugo's help, but over time everyone starts to grow as people, and Wallace realises that maybe he was a bit of a dick when he was alive, and he starts to sympathise with other people, and he starts to help other spirits that come through alongside Hugo, because he's still determined that he's not done here, he's not leaving yet. And it's just amazing. It's amazing because it's not just Wallace's death that you're dealing with these other spirits that come through, and you see how different types of deaths would affect spirits differently. Like, if you have a very sudden violent death, that could translate to you being really angry and upset, or like scared all the time. Or if it's a death from a long illness, maybe you've come to accept it and you will move on easily. But also it talks about how people who are still living respond to either sudden deaths or the death of loved ones and stuff like that. And it's so lovely, and such a heavy topic for what is a middle grade book. But handled in a really graceful way. The next, again, I shouldn't have been surprised that this author was going to end up on my top 10 list, because she was last year as well. Number 3 is A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. This is the second book in the Monk and Robot series, the first one being A Psalm for the Wild-Built, which was on my top 10 last year. So because it's the second in a series, I'm just going to talk about the series as a whole, so we're not getting into spoilers. So the Robot and Monk series is set in a future time on another planet, where at some point in time robots gained sentience and decided that they didn't want to be part of humanity, so they went off into the woods to figure themselves out. And like, I think it's about 100 years since that has happened. Oh, centuries, so it doesn't say, but hundreds of years since that has happened. And we have a young T-Monk named Dex, who is currently having issues with their purpose in life. They are a T-Monk, which is a job that I want. Basically, they go from town to town, making tea for people to help them to relax, and basically they choose the type of tea based on the problems that these people have. So if they're really stressed, they'll give them something to like help relieve their stress, or to help them get some sleep if they've got insomnia, or just to give them permission to stop for a minute and sit down and have a nice cup of tea without worrying about everything else going on in their lives. And so Dex loves their job, but they're starting to feel a bit unfulfilled and like, oh, is this all I am? Because if it is, it's not filling that hole inside me. So they decide to just go on a pilgrimage into the wilds, and they stumble upon a robot named Mosscap, who's hilarious, and I love him. Or love it. Sorry, Mosscap. There's a whole subplot in this about, I say subplot, it's just accepted that multiple genders exist. And so they pilgrimage together to this old temple, and during it, it's like the whole thing is a treatise on the fact that you don't have to have a purpose to still be worthwhile. You don't have to, every single thing you do in life doesn't have to be for a greater goal. It can just be because it makes you happy. You also don't have to have one thing that fulfills you. You can have many different things. Sometimes your job is just your job. It doesn't have to be your dream job. You can have other things, other hobbies and stuff that help you. And then Prayer for the Crown Shy went into a different way, which is you do not have to constantly be providing a service in order to deserve love and rest and food and stuff like that. It's you being alive means that you deserve that. You don't have to prove that you deserve to be looked after. And it's just these books are like warm baths, and I love them. And number 2 on my list is The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. Again, I think Alex E. Harrow was on my list last year with the Thousand Doors of January. Yes. So another amazing book. This is set in the 1800s in New Salem in America, and it follows a suffragette movement that is simultaneously gaining votes for women but also rights for witches. And it follows 3 sisters who are all slightly estranged from each other. They're all very different, but they come together to start this like underground suffragist movement to get rights for witches. And it's so good, and the world building is so good, and like the magic in this is amazing, but it's just the whole I love books with, like, you could give me any plot you want. If the characters are well-rounded and well-written and it's character-focused, I will be all over that shit. And this is one of those. And number 1 on my... Ooh, dropping it. And number 1 on my list of favourite books in 2022 is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Oh my god, this book was immaculate. This book, I think, is probably number 1 for one of the same reasons why Stalasy was number 1 last year. They have very different plot lines, but very similar feelings. For me, anyway, they evoked the same kinds of emotions. So Piranesi is about the character Piranesi, who lives in something that he just calls the house. And it's basically a massive labyrinth of stone rooms that have like statues and different things, and he has spent most of his life, or that he can remember, mapping the different rooms and cataloguing the statues and looking after the house because he feels very connected to it. The house provides for him, therefore he will look after the house. And there is one other creature in the house called the Other, who he meets up with every week or so, and they discuss different like scientific matters and everything like that. But there is a disconnect in that the Other only seems to want the house to give him something, whereas Piranesi just wants to live in symbiosis with the house. And it's just... I want to live in the house, to be honest. It's very... like, he is lonely quite a bit, but because he is alone all the time, it doesn't actually bother him all that much. But I want to live in the house. So badly. I think, yeah, it's that mixture of, it's just beautifully written, it's a bit dreamlike as you're reading it. It's written in diary entries that Piranesi is writing. And it was one of those things where like I could see where it was going, and when it went where it was going, I wasn't upset about that, because I was like, yes, I would have been disappointed if it didn't go where it was building up to going. So I was like, thank you. Side note, for writers of various medias, that's not a bad thing. People being able to guess where a story is going is not a bad thing. It does not mean that you then suddenly have to rewrite it in order to go, ha, gotcha. Build up your story so that it makes logical sense when it goes where it's going. Just bitchy side note. Right. So that is my top 10 books of 2022. Let me know in the comments if you read any of those books. Did you agree with me? Did you love them? Did you hate them? What was your favourite book of 2022? I'd love to know so that I can add it to my ever expanding TBR. And what are you excited to read in 2023? What do you hope will be on your top 10 for 2023? I don't have an answer for that question myself, to be honest. But anyway, if you enjoyed this, please consider giving it a like and maybe subscribe if you want to see more from me. As always, be kind to yourself and be kind to others, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.